Through storm and silver howls, the rejected Omega followed the wolf unaware he was the Alpha King. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Elena Moore. The night pressed close like a held breath as Elena Moore stepped beyond the last lantern of her pack's boundary, the wind combing through the pines and carrying with it a taste of rain and distant snow. And though she had learned to keep her head down and her voice quiet, there was nothing quiet about being left behind when the ritual ended and the circle closed without her name. So she walked with boots damp and shoulders squared, measuring each mile by the steady rhythm of her heartbeat as the storm gathered its courage overhead, silver clouds piling high until the sky felt heavy enough to touch. And she told herself that movement was better than standing still, that following the old trail west for 5 miles would bring a creek she knew by memory, if not by hope, that a person could start again anywhere if they kept walking. And yet the forest answered with a long, clear howl that cut through the wind and threaded something sharp and familiar through her chest. Not a challenge, and not a warning, but a sound shaped like loneliness. And Elena slowed, counting seconds the way her mother once taught her, listening for the echo, for the answer, for proof that she hadn't imagined it. And when another howl followed, closer now, she felt the pull of it tug at her steps as if the night itself were asking a question only she could hear. So she turned off the trail despite the cold needling her cheeks and the ground slick beneath her boots, following the sound across a low ridge, and into a stand of birch where moonlight broke into fragments. And there she saw him, a pale shape half-shadowed by brush, a wolf the color of winter ash with eyes bright and alert, not wild, with fear but careful, watching her watch him. And Elena raised her hands the way she'd learned to do when things were fragile, whispering nothing at all because sometimes silence was the kindest promise. And the storm rolled closer, thunder counting the distance in seconds while rain began to fall in earnest, slicking her hair against her temples. And she took one more step, and then another, gauging the space between them by inches until the wolf shifted his weight, and she noticed the way he favored one side, the way his breath came measured and calm as if he refused to give pain the last word. And something inside her settled, a quiet certainty that following was not the same as chasing, that staying was not the same as claiming. So when the wolf turned and moved through the trees with deliberate patience, Elena followed, trusting the steadiness of his pace and the strange warmth that lingered where his gaze met hers, unaware that the path opening ahead was older than any trail on her map and that the night, with all its storm and silver howls, had just begun to tell her who she was meant to be. Elena kept close enough to see the white edge of the wolf's tail slip between trunks, but far enough to honor the space he seemed to require, the storm pacing them with steady rain that drummed on leaves and softened the forest floor. And she counted the distance by familiar measures, half a mile by the way her calves warmed, another half by the way the air cooled as they descended toward lower ground, the scent of wet stone rising to tell her a creek lay somewhere ahead. And when thunder rolled, she noted the gap between flash and sound, 6 seconds then 5, close but not closing, as if the sky itself agreed to keep a respectful distance. And the wolf adjusted his pace to hers without looking back, a small kindness that made her breath ease, because she had learned the language of small kindnesses the hard way, through doors left ajar and meals set aside, through glances that said you can stay a little longer. And she wondered what had taught him the same restraint, what winters he had counted, what rules he followed that kept his steps deliberate and his presence calm. And when the rain thickened, he led her beneath a lean of rock where the ground sloped just enough to shed water, a place she had passed once as a child and forgotten until now. And she took off her jacket to wring it out, the fabric heavy with rain, then spread it across a low branch to drip, trusting that if the wolf wished her gone, he would have already said so in the only way he knew how. But he did not. He settled a few feet away with his head angled toward the trees, ears attentive, posture relaxed but ready. And Elena sat with her back to the stone, knees drawn up, hands warming under her arms, listening to the creek speak in 1,000 small voices. And the howl returned, closer now, but answered by nothing else. A solitary note that softened as it faded, and she felt the quiet connection of it thread through her again. Not ownership and not promise, just recognition. And she spoke then, not to claim but to steady herself, telling him her name and the simple truth that she would follow where the ground was kind and stop where the night asked her to. And if he understood words or only cadence she could not tell, but his breathing matched hers after a moment, slow and even. And when she noticed the slight hitch in his left shoulder, she did not reach for it. She only shifted her weight to block the wind and set her pack between them where he could see it, an offering of ordinary things, a canteen half full, a protein bar folded carefully. And when he glanced at it, she slid it closer, without pushing it toward him, the way you learn to offer help without demanding acceptance. And time passed, measured by the rain easing from sheets to a whisper, by the forest resuming its patient hum, by the wolf standing and stepping away as if to test her resolve. And Elena rose, pulled on her jacket still damp and cool, and followed again, the path bending toward the creek where the water ran clear and shallow, 10 feet across at most, stones bright beneath the surface, and he crossed. First, choosing a line of stepping rocks that made sense even in the dark, and she mirrored his steps, boots splashing once when she misjudged the last stone, laughing softly at herself, a sound that surprised her with how easily it came. And on the far bank the wolf paused and looked at her fully then, eyes reflecting the pale light with a steadiness that felt like a held door, and Elena nodded, as if to say thank you for waiting, thank you for not leaving, unaware that every careful choice she made, every mile she matched to his pace, was already binding the night into something neither of them could yet name. The creek widened into a bend where the water slowed, and the stones grew smooth as old coins, and the wolf angled upstream for a short distance before veering toward a stand of fir, where the ground rose gently, and the air smelled clean and resin bright. And Elena followed with her senses tuned to the small signs he left behind, the way his paw prints spaced evenly as if measured, the way he paused where the wind shifted, checking not for danger alone but for direction, and she noticed again the careful favoring of his left side when the slopes steepened, a detail that made her keep her steps light and her distance respectful, because rushing had never brought her anything worth keeping. And the night softened further as the storm moved on, rain thinning to a mist that beaded on needles and turned the world silver gray, and she thought of the miles behind them, maybe 3 now since the lantern light, and the miles ahead that she could not name. And it surprised her that she was not afraid, only attentive, the way she felt when reading a map that did not yet have all its lines drawn. And when the wolf stopped near a fallen log and turned his head, she understood without words that this was a place to wait, a shallow bowl of earth sheltered by roots where the ground held warmth. And she set her pack down and knelt to adjust the laces on her boots, fingers steady despite the chill, aware of his eyes on her hands, and she spoke again, quietly, telling him about the creek she knew farther west that ran into a small lake no more than a quarter-mile across, about a footbridge someone had repaired last spring, about a cabin she had once passed with smoke curling from its chimney on a clear morning. Details offered like breadcrumbs not to lead but to share, and the wolf listened in that still way that made time feel wider, his ears turning at each sound, his gaze shifting to the dark between trees when an owl cut the air, and Elena felt the peculiar comfort of being witnessed without being weighed. And when she rose to stretch her legs, rolling her shoulders, he rose too, mirroring the motion with a patience that made her smile, and they set off again, the trail narrowing into something older, not marked on her map, but worn into the land by feet that knew where they were going. And she counted another mile by the ache easing from her calves and the steady warmth in her chest. And then she noticed it, the way the forest changed its posture around him, birds quieting as he passed, not from fear but from attention, as if the night itself leaned in to hear him breathe. And she shook her head at the thought, because she had learned not to invent crowns where there were none, to see what was and not what might be. And the wolf slipped between 2 boulders and into a clearing shaped like a shallow cup, moonlight pooling there in soft bands. And Elena followed, boots crunching lightly on gravel, and she felt the quiet press of something unnamed settle around them, not a boundary but a presence. And the wolf paused and lowered himself carefully, easing his weight with a control that told her the ache was real and managed. and she did what came naturally, pulling a clean cloth from her pack and dampening it at her canteen, then setting it within his reach without touching him, an invitation without insistence. And after a long moment he nudged it closer with his nose, accepting the help in the same spirit it was offered. And Elena let out a breath she had not known she was holding, warmth spreading through her palms as if the night had nodded yes. And she sat back on her heels, watching the cloth darken as it met the ground, listening to the creek murmur beyond the trees, unaware that every choice she made to move gently, to wait when waiting was wise, to offer without demand, was teaching the forest how to remember her. The clearing held its quiet as if it were a promise kept, moonlight resting on the gravel and roots like a soft hand. And Elena shifted closer to the fallen log to take the edge off the damp, mindful not to crowd him, because closeness chosen was different from closeness taken, and she had learned to tell the difference early. And when the cloth lay between them she waited, counting her breaths until the wolf nudged it again, drawing it nearer with a careful precision that made her chest loosen, and she spoke softly, not instructions and not questions, just the steady facts of the night, the temperature dropping a few degrees, the mist lifting, the way the moon climbed a handspan higher, because naming what was real made it easier to share. And he listened, eyes half-lidded, breath slow and even, and she noticed the way his ears tipped when she mentioned the lake and the footbridge, as if those landmarks meant something to him too. And she wondered how many maps lived inside him, how many routes he carried, without paper. And when a breeze slid through the clearing he angled his body to shield her from it, a small adjustment that felt deliberate. And Elena laughed under her breath, not at him, but at herself for the way gratitude came so easily now. And she rolled her shoulders again, flexing her fingers, the warmth in her palms lingering as if the night had stored it there. And she considered the hour by the moon's position and the way fatigue softened into a manageable ache, telling her they had walked near 5 miles since the lantern light. And she reached for her canteen and took a careful sip, then set it down within his view. The cap loosened, and when he drank she looked away to give him privacy, studying the grain of the log, and the way lichen traced pale constellations across its bark, and the forest breathed with them. No rush and no threat, only the patience of a place that had seen many choices made well and poorly, and endured both. And when the wolf rose again she followed his lead, packing her things with practiced efficiency, the night air now cool enough to sharpen thought. And they moved on, the path threading between rocks and into a stand of young pines where needles softened each step, and Elena matched his pace. Instinctively, a few feet behind, counting strides until her steps aligned with his. And she noticed how he paused at the crest of a low rise to test the wind, how he chose the gentler slope down, how he avoided loose gravel without looking, and the sense of being guided without being directed settled deeper. And when the forest opened again she saw the lake she had spoken of, dark and smooth as polished glass, maybe a quarter-mile across, moonlight stretching a silver lane across its surface. And the footbridge lay to their right, boards pale and dry, sturdy enough to trust. And the wolf crossed first, pausing midway to look back, and she crossed with him, the boards humming faintly beneath her boots. And on the far side a cabin waited among the trees, lights dark but windows catching the moon, smoke absent but the place standing solid, a shelter if needed. And Elena stopped, weighing the choice, because following did not mean surrendering judgment. And she met his gaze and said she would stop here if he wished, that the night had given them enough. And he held her eyes for a long moment, then turned toward the water instead, walking the shoreline with an easy confidence that told her this was not the end of the road, only a pause. And Elena followed, heart steady, unaware that the way she chose to trust without erasing herself, to offer help without asking for a price, was shaping a bond stronger than any vow spoken aloud. The shoreline curved gently, stones clicking underfoot as the wolf traced a patient arc along the water. And Elena followed with the moon at her shoulder, the lake breathing in small ripples that carried the silver lane outward, and then let it go. And she matched his pace without effort now, the distance between them a shared understanding rather than a measure. And when he paused to test the ground near a cluster of reeds she stopped too, watching the way he listened to the night, head angled, ears attentive, posture easy. And she thought about how following had become a choice renewed with each step, not a promise made once and spent, and she felt steadier for it, because choosing again meant she could stop again if the path asked too much, and the path did not. It only asked attention. And when the ground firmed into packed earth, she noted the scent change, water giving way to leaf and loam, and the air cooled another degree, crisp enough to clear her thoughts, and she spoke quietly about the cabin again, how it had once belonged to a fisherman who kept his tools clean and his word cleaner, how storms passed easier when you knew where to wait them out, and the wolf glanced toward the trees where the cabin stood, considering, then continued along the lake's edge, and Elena smiled, accepting the answer without needing it explained, and they moved past a stand of cattails where the water whispered secrets and into a stretch of open shore where the moonlight fell clean and wide, and she felt the pull of fatigue soften into a companionable weight, the kind that promised rest rather than demanded it, and she adjusted her pack straps and checked her watch, noting the hour by habit even though the night did not seem to care, and she thought of the miles they had shared, 7 now by her best count, and how those miles had taught her more than the ritual ever had, teaching her how to read the ground and the space between beings. And the wolf slowed, then stopped near a smooth slab of rock warmed by the day's last light, a place that held heat and offered shelter from the breeze, and Elena recognized the choice for what it was, not an ending but a place to breathe, and she set her pack down and sat, palms flat on the stone, feeling the stored warmth, and she laughed softly at the simple relief of it, and the wolf settled nearby, careful again with that left side, and she shifted her position to give him the best of the warmth without touching him, and time passed measured by the moon's climb and the lake's quiet speech, and she ate a small meal and set another aside where he could see it, and when he did not take it she did not press, because care offered twice becomes something else, and she leaned back on her elbows and watched a thin cloud pass over the moon, turning silver to pearl, and she told him about the way clouds look like doors when you watch them long enough, about the way storms teach patience if you let them, and she did not know whether he understood the words or only the steadiness beneath them, but his breathing matched hers again, and when the cloud moved on he rose and stepped to the water, drinking, then looked back at her as if to ask a question he would not voice, and Elena answered with action, standing and slinging her pack, nodding once, because yes could be quiet and still be true, and they set off again along a narrow path that hugged the tree-line, the lake slipping behind them, the forest opening ahead, and she followed without hurry, aware now of the way the night bent around him, how paths seemed to make room, how the quiet gathered where he passed, and she told herself not to read crowns into shadows, not to mistake steadiness for rule, and yet she could not ignore the calm that followed him like a held note, and she felt it gather in her chest as a certainty that did not demand belief, only attention, and she followed, step for step, trusting the path, because she trusted her choice to keep choosing. The path tightened as it climbed, the trees thinning into a high saddle where the wind moved clean and the stars pressed closer, and Elena felt the night sharpen her senses without hardening them, every sound arriving distinct, the scuff of her boots, the soft brush of needles, the measured rhythm of the wolf's breath, and she noticed the way he paused more often now, not from fatigue but from calculation, reading the air the way a seasoned traveler reads weather, and she adjusted her steps to keep the same respectful distance, because closeness still mattered, and when the wind shifted he angled his body between her and the open slope without breaking stride, a protective instinct so quiet it almost escaped notice, and Elena's thoughts turned practical, mapping options the way she always did, the cabin behind them if they needed shelter, the ridge ahead promising a view and perhaps a clearer route, and she spoke those options aloud, not asking permission but sharing awareness, and the wolf listened, head tilted, then chose the ridge, and she followed, trusting the choice because it fit the land as much as it fit him, and the ground leveled at the crest, opening to a wide view of rolling dark and silver, moonlight stitching paths across distant water and fields, and Elena stopped to take it in, the kind of sight that steadied a person, and she felt the warmth in her palms again, faint but present, as if the night approved of her patience, and the wolf stood beside her now rather than ahead, not crowding, just close enough to share the view, and she noticed how the forest quieted at his presence, not alarmed but attentive, as if listening for a cue that never came, and she frowned, cataloging the detail without leaping to meaning, because she had learned how quickly stories could run away from facts. And yet more signs gathered, the way paths seemed to reveal themselves under his feet, the way he avoided loose ground without testing it, the way he watched the horizon with a steady calm that felt earned, and Elena's curiosity deepened without tipping into fear, because nothing he did pressed against her boundaries. And when a distant sound drifted up the slope, a low call carried on. The wind, he answered with silence rather than challenge, a choice that spoke of restraint, and Elena realized that wherever they were headed, it was not a place that welcomed noise, and she slowed, matching his quiet, and they moved along the ridge for another mile by her count, the ground firm and forgiving, and then descended toward a line of old oaks where the air warmed slightly, and the wolf tested the descent carefully, favoring that left side again, and Elena shifted her pack to lighten her step and followed his line exactly, trusting his read of the slope, and at the bottom they reached a narrow meadow where the grass lay flattened as if by frequent passage, and she noted the pattern, a corridor used with care, and she felt the question forming before she found the words. Not who are you, but how do you know this place? And she asked the second question aloud, keeping her voice even, and the wolf met her gaze, eyes reflecting the stars, and held it for a heartbeat longer than before, a look that felt like an answer given in a language she was still learning. And then he turned and continued, and Elena accepted that too, because answers given too soon often carried a cost, and the meadow opened into a trail that bent toward the east, and she recognized the bend from an old map, a route that led towards settled lands without entering them, and she felt a prickle of awareness, the sense that she was being guided around something rather than toward it, and she appreciated the care of that choice. And as they walked she noticed her fatigue had thinned to a manageable hum, her breathing steady, her thoughts clear, and she wondered if the steadiness came from the miles or from the company, and the wolf slowed again, listening, then lifted his head toward the horizon as the sky began to pale. Not dawn yet, but the promise of it. And Elena felt the night loosen its hold, the silver easing into gray, and she realized that whatever was different about him, it was not dangerous, it was deliberate, and she followed with a quiet confidence, unaware that the restraint she admired was the mark of a rule he had chosen long before this night, and that her willingness to walk beside it without demanding proof was already changing the shape of the road ahead. The sky lightened by degrees so small Elena felt them more than saw them, gray thinning into pearl, the stars loosening their grip as the meadow breathed out a cool morning, and the wolf slowed, then stopped at the edge of a stand of tall grass where the land dipped gently toward a stream, and Elena halted a few steps behind him, instinct telling her this was a threshold, not a place to rush, and she watched as he lifted his head to the wind one last time, listening as if taking attendance of the morning, and then the quiet gathered, not the hush of fear but the stillness of something being decided, and she felt the warmth in her palms bloom again, steady and unmistakable, and she spoke his name without knowing why, not a name she knew but the sound of acknowledgement, and the wolf turned his head toward her, eyes bright and calm, and held her gaze as the light reached them fully, and the change came like a breath rather than a break, like a choice made gently and kept, the shape before her easing and rising, posture shifting with care, no suddenness and no alarm, just a careful unfolding as if the night were releasing what it had been holding. And Elena stood rooted, hands open at her sides, because she recognized restraint when she saw it, and she recognized respect, and when the man stood where the wolf had been, tall and steady, hair pale in the morning light, eyes the same clear silver she had followed through the dark, she did not step back, she only exhaled, the sound leaving her chest like a door opening, and he dressed the moment with the same care he had given the path, voice low, and even when he spoke her name, Elena, as if he had known it all along and honored it by waiting, and she took in the details without judgment, the way his shoulders bore ease and responsibility at once, the way the air seemed to settle around him as if accustomed to listening, and she found her voice, asking not who are you, but are you well, because the ache she had noticed mattered more than answers, and he smiled faintly at that, a small curve that belonged to a man used to patience, and he nodded, assuring her that he was, that the night had been kind because she had been, and the words landed gently, without claim, and Elena felt the world widen, realization arranging itself with quiet precision. The signs she had catalogued lining up not into a crown but into a truth, and she said his name when he offered it, Rowan Blackwood, letting it sit between them without weight, and the title followed after, not spoken aloud but present in the way the land held him, in the way the morning bent to his stillness, and Elena did not bow, did not avert her eyes, because she had followed a wolf, not a throne, and Rowan watched her with something like relief, as if this had been the hope he did not ask for. And he told her simply that he had walked the night in that form to listen without being heard, to learn what the land said when power did not answer for him, and that he had not expected to be followed, not like this, not by someone who knew when to wait and when to choose. And Elena laughed softly, the sound threading through the clearing like sunlight, and said she had followed because the path made sense, because the night asked for attention and he gave it, and because she could stop at any time and did not need permission to continue. And Rowan inclined his head, acknowledging the truth of it. And the morning spread fully now, color returning to leaf and stone, the meadow alive with small movements. And Elena realized that the night had done its work without spectacle, revealing what mattered not by force but by care. And she stood there with the Alpha King revealed and unchanged in the ways that counted, aware that the choice she had made to follow a wounded wolf had led her to a man who understood restraint as strength, and that whatever came next would be shaped by the same quiet agreement that had carried them through the dark. Morning settled into the meadow with a practical gentleness, dew lifting as the sun climbed, and Rowan did not step closer than courtesy allowed, giving Elena the space to decide what the new light meant, and she appreciated that more than any declaration, because it confirmed what she had sensed all night, that his strength did not lean on proximity or pressure, and she adjusted her pack straps and asked where the trail led from here, grounding herself in the next small truth, and Rowan answered plainly, naming the stream below and the road beyond it that curved towards settled lands without crossing them, a route used when quiet mattered, and Elena nodded, recognizing the care in that choice. And as they spoke, the meadow began to stir with life, birds returning to song, insects warming into motion, the ordinary rhythms reclaiming the space, and with them came movement at the edge of the grass, figures approaching at a respectful distance, not rushing and not hidden there. Presence announced by the way Rowan angled his stance, attentive but unthreatening, and Elena felt the moment sharpen, not into danger but into significance, and she held steady, because steadiness had carried her this far, and the newcomers stopped where the grass met the trees, waiting, eyes on Rowan but posture open, and he acknowledged them with a small lift of his hand, a signal that spoke of trust and order without spectacle. And Elena watched the exchange with a clarity that surprised her, understanding now that authority could look like patience, and Rowan turned back to her before speaking to anyone else, asking her preference, not where she wished to go but whether she wished to stay, a question shaped to honor choice. And Elena considered the road behind her, the ritual that had closed without her name, the night that had opened instead, and she said she would walk a little farther before deciding, because decisions made in motion suited her better, and Rowan smiled, a quiet acknowledgement, and told the others that they would proceed as planned, nothing more, and they accepted it without comment, dispersing with the ease of people accustomed to restraint, and Elena felt a small knot loosen in her chest, relief not at protection but at the absence of coercion, and they set off together, Rowan matching her pace rather than setting one, the path dipping toward the stream, where water ran clear and shallow, and she crossed first this time, choosing her stones with confidence earned, and he followed, favoring that left side less now, the ache easing as if the night had carried some of it away, and on the far bank she paused to look back at the meadow, the silver of it fading into green, and Rowan stood beside her, not ahead, and she told him she had followed a wolf because the wolf had listened, and that she would not trade that memory for any title, and he accepted the truth of it without defense, saying that listening was the point, that he had learned the land spoke more honestly when power did not answer back, and that the night had taught him something he would carry forward, and Elena felt the weight of that promise without needing it spelled out. And as they walked she noticed how others kept their distance while remaining present, a circle that did not close but held, and she realized that recognition did not require a crowd, only consistency, and Rowan asked about her plans, not in the language of summons, but of curiosity, and she shared what she knew and what she did not, the skills she carried, the places she might go, and he listened as he had listened all night, taking her measure, without trying to change it, and the road bent toward a small rise where the view opened again, fields catching the light, a river threading through them like a promise kept, and Elena stopped there, breathing in the day, and she felt the decision settle. Not final but real, and she said she would walk with him to the rise and then choose, because choice mattered more than outcome, and Rowan inclined his head, accepting the boundary with respect, and as they stood together in the growing light, Elena understood that recognition had already happened, not when a king was revealed, but when a wounded wolf had been followed without demand, and that whatever path she chose next would be shaped by that same quiet courage. The rise gave them a final, generous view, fields warming into color and the river turning from silver to blue as the sun cleared the horizon, and Elena stood with her weight balanced, feeling the ground answer her feet, because this was where choices felt honest, and Rowan waited without speaking, hands easy at his sides, eyes on the land rather than on her, and that restraint made the moment lighter, not heavier. And Elena understood then that endings did not need ceremony to be true, they needed clarity, and she said she would walk with him beyond the rise, not because of crowns or expectations, but because the path they shared had taught her something she wanted to keep learning, and Rowan accepted the decision with the same calm he had offered all night, gratitude present without possession, and he told her what the next miles would hold, a road that bent toward the river town, a place where work was steady and names mattered less than conduct, and Elena nodded, thinking of hands and tools and days that made sense, and as they set off she felt the circle around them adjust, those who followed keeping a respectful distance, not as guards but as witnesses, and she noticed how the land seemed to recognize Rowan not with deference, but familiarity, as if it knew his step and approved of his pace, and she walked beside him, not behind and not ahead. And when they reached the river he stopped and let her choose the crossing, and she chose the shallow ford where stones made a clean line, and crossed first, the water cool and clear around her ankles, and on the far bank she paused, looking back at the current and then at him, and she said she had followed because he had shown her how to listen, and that listening had led her to herself as much as to him. And Rowan answered with a simple truth, that he had walked as a wolf to remember what power forgot, and that she had followed without asking for proof, and that mattered, and the words settled without weight. And as the morning grew they reached the edge of the town where roofs caught the light and voices carried softly, and Rowan slowed, mindful of thresholds, and Elena felt the old hesitation stir and then pass, replaced by a steadier resolve, and when someone recognized Rowan and moved to kneel, he lifted a hand and shook his head, redirecting the gesture into a greeting instead, and Elena saw how quickly the moment changed, how respect could stand upright without bending, and she realized that this was the justice she had been waiting for without naming it, not spectacle but correction, not apology but practice, and Rowan turned to her then and spoke so all could hear, not claiming but acknowledging, saying that Elena Moore had walked the night by choice and kept her boundaries intact, that she had offered help without demand and followed without surrender, and that such strength deserved recognition wherever paths crossed, and the words were not a crown but a door, opening space rather than closing it, and Elena felt the warmth in her palms one last time, not as a sign to follow but as a confirmation she could keep, and she stepped forward into the town with her head level, the past receding without being erased, and Rowan walked beside her with the same measured pace, the wolf and the king aligned by the same principle that had carried them through storm and silence. And Elena knew then that destiny did not arrive like thunder, it arrived like a path chosen again and again, and she chose it, not because she had been rejected, but because she had been seen.